With the Joe Flacco trade now behind them, the Browns essentially spent 4 weeks pretending they were something they're not. We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. And Kevin Stefanski admitted on Wednesday that the Joe Flacco trade was a surprise even to him, which paints an interesting picture for the state of the team moving forward. Plus, the Browns are embracing their youth movement at quarterback. I feel like they should have done that probably from Jump Street. And I think we're one step closer to seeing Shedeur Sanders playing for this team. Kevin Stefanski, though, isn't so sure yet. I do want to thank you for being here every day with the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day. As always, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed, with bonus content on some weekends as well. And I want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So we did hear from Kevin Stefanski on Wednesday, his annual Wednesday midweek press conference leading up to whatever opponent they are playing that week. And he did have some interesting things to say in regards to the Joe Flacco trade that went down on Tuesday, including admitting to all of us that essentially this trade was a surprise even to him. Like, it came out of nowhere. They weren't planning on trading Joe Flacco, and it just kind of popped up on the radar, and everything came together very quickly. And they decided to move on from Joe Flacco for the 5th-round pick and lean into this current quarterback situation that has 2 rookies in it, also has Bailey Zappi in it, and potentially Deshaun Watson in it. He gave interesting answers to all those different angles and all the different ways that this thing could kind of play out. So we'll get into that, including the number 2 quarterback part of this, which we'll get to in the final segment. But first, I'll play you the clip here from Kevin Stefanski, who was asked about the trade itself and sort of reflected on it and where the Browns go from here.
Well, first I'd tell you is the Joe trade took us by surprise. That was not something that we saw coming. You know, they called us, and it happened very fast and happened not too long ago. So still working through all roster type of things. I always have to be mindful of our players and our players' development, and I want to make sure that I'm always doing what's best for our players and, of course, our team. But, with young players, I'm always thinking about last week making the change to Dillon. You have to think long and hard about that, because these are young players that you're so invested in their development. So I'll let the week play out and make a decision later on that. Well, obviously AB makes those decisions. I trust AB. We talk about every decision we make. They wanted Joe. They made the phone call. Obviously, it gives Joe an opportunity to go play again. But I trust in our decisions.
So I thought it was interesting that Kevin was pretty open about the fact that he was surprised by this and caught off guard. Normally, he would give sort of the vague, like, you could tell he truly had no idea this was coming, because normally he would just give you sort of the blanket answer of, hey, listen, we talk about these things. This one popped up. We had conversations about it. We made the move, and we thought it was what was best for the team. Something along those lines, like the very scripted answer. He didn't do that here. He was candid. He was telling you, like, it was a surprise to us too. And that second part of that first answer was him sort of talking about the number 2 quarterback spot, which I promise we're going to get to coming up in the show. You see it in the topics there, so we're going to get to it. But more so than anything, I think why this is interesting. From a standpoint of it being a surprise. First of all, I was ready to talk about how if Flacco goes there and plays well, it's going to be an indictment on Kevin Stefanski because he couldn't get Flacco to play well here. And while that still is going to be something that people use against him, I think that's less so now that we find out the context that this wasn't really part of the plan. This wasn't really something that they were trying to execute or do. When they started week 6, like, it wasn't on their radar necessarily that he was going to get traded. Kevin said, even as recently as like Monday evening, they weren't planning on making that deal, or it wasn't something that they were thinking about, but the Bengals came calling and they decided to make it happen. But it's more so now about like where the direction of the team where it's going from here, because there was a malaise, I think, in general about this locker room today, and just how guys kind of were moving and how guys were kind of talking. I don't know if it's just jet lag from the London trip. Maybe it's just the shock, still sort of compartmentalizing or working through the shock of the Flacco deal. Not that listen, he's a 40-year-old quarterback, tail end of his career. He was benched already. So it doesn't have to be like this end of the world sort of scenario here. But I do think guys echoed Kevin Stefanski's comments in terms of like realizing how this move was a surprise to them and that they, didn't necessarily see it coming either. And so I think he was a captain. Last week, Kevin was talking about how his leadership was going to still be so valuable to this team, and now all of a sudden he's gone. So I don't know if that's part of it, like the way that the attitude just kind of felt, or the vibes in the locker room just kind of felt today. Maybe the London trip is part of it. Maybe it's a little bit of everything here. The fact that they're 1-4 certainly could be playing a role here as well. But it does feel like, this is the official start of them leaning into evaluating these guys for the rest of the season. And so I think that does weigh on especially veterans in that locker room who are sort of reconciling with the idea that we tried something, it didn't work. So we quickly pivoted to these young guys. We're 1-4 on the season, and now we have to play 12 more games where you kind of realize what the job here is, or the purpose here is. They can say it's about winning. They can say it's about trying to go out and play competitive football and rack up as many wins and try to save the season and get back into it. They can sell you on that, and they can talk about that to the people inside this building. But deep down, the thing that they won't say, the things that you won't talk about at parties, is that they are now in a situation where they're evaluating this roster and evaluating everybody and trying to figure out who they have in these rookie quarterbacks and how viable it's going to be to keep these guys around next year, or invest in them next year, or try to build around them next year. Those are the questions that they're now trying to sort of answer. We knew this would come. I don't know that we knew it was going to come this soon in the season based on the way that the Browns set up the situation to begin with, but that's where we are. And so I wonder if that's sort of playing into the feel around the team right now, this realization of where things are at. That's kind of how I feel the Flacco trade, especially with it being a shock, being something that wasn't necessarily in the plans for them, where I think it sort of hits home. And what it sort of symbolizes is that they are now officially all in on this, let's march through 2025 and get ourselves to 2026, where hopefully we can get back on track and put together a competitive product that can compete in this league again. Because right now, we're in the evaluation stage. And so I think that's interesting, and I'm curious to see what that means for just the vibes in the locker room, the rest of the season, moving forward, etc. But it's an interesting sort of dynamic that I felt out here today in the aftermath of this Joe Flacco trade. Even understanding he was the backup quarterback now, I think it does symbolize, though, to this team that the focus has shifted in terms of what 2025 is about the rest of the way. Along those lines, I think the Browns could have saved themselves the time here and just ripped off the Band-Aid from week one, because it does feel like they sort of wasted 4 weeks here, that they could have already embraced this mentality. We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast. Season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's right. Pick a bet, put down the bucks, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. The best part about FanDuel is that it's the best. It's one of my favorite ways, honestly, to follow along with the NFL season just in general, because they have betting options for whatever type of bettor that you are. Maybe you want to bet on a certain player to eclipse a certain milestone that week, and maybe you want to take that milestone, pair it with a couple other props, and build a same game parlay, throw a money line on there, or you can just bet a money line in real time as the action is unfolding and it changes throughout the game. Like I said, whether it's your team or another team that you're watching, following the NFL season with FanDuel makes you feel like you're in the action no matter what game's on your television. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today to get started. All right. So as I said last segment, the idea here that the Browns are essentially embracing this youth movement and really leaning into now the rest of 2025 is about figuring out who we are for 2026. I think that's what the Joe Flacco trade sort of symbolized. And I can understand where this maybe wasn't the thing. This wasn't on their radar. Trading Joe Flacco wasn't something they were thinking was going to happen. Maybe they thought it back in the day. Maybe they thought it back before training camp. Like, hey, depending on how this quarterback competition shakes out, we'll move one of these veterans. Maybe they thought it would be Flacco and they'd be starting Kenny Pickett. I certainly would give some credence to that idea. And I can accept that this wasn't their plan. Like they weren't coming into this week saying like, let's just move on from Joe Flacco and do this right now. It wasn't something that they anticipated happening so quickly here. But I do think as we look back at these first 5 weeks and the 4 weeks where Flacco was the starter, I do think it's fair to say that the Browns kind of wasted 4 weeks here. I talked about it during the offseason, the idea of, do you just start the season with your rookies as the starters or one of the rookies as the starter and the other one as the backup, rip off that Band-Aid and say, here's who we are. I think instead the Browns tried to convince themselves to start this season that they were something they're not. I think they tried to, and I commend them for doing this. Listen, I get it. You got a lot of veterans on this team. You couldn't just let the season mean nothing, especially out of the gate, and say, well, hey, let's just put these guys, tell guys to put their bodies on the lines for us week after week, only for it to end with us being awful and winning 3 games and only caring about evaluating young guys. Like that couldn't have been the messaging. That couldn't have been the way that you sort of pitched the season. You had to play the quarterback that gave you the best chance to win if you're Kevin Stefanski. And I get that. I get that idea. But I do think that they sort of delayed the inevitable here and probably could have, they wasted, frankly, 4 weeks where they could have been evaluating these guys sooner, where you could have been getting a Dillon Gabriel valuable experience, where maybe you get to see Shedeur Sanders sooner because you're getting Dillon that experience earlier on in the season. And that still could be the case now. I think week 4 or week 5, him taking over wasn't necessarily where most of us thought that would be happening, obviously, either. So that could still be the case that they get both those guys the reps that they're sort of looking for here. But yeah, it feels like they wasted 4 weeks just sort of meddling in mediocrity with Flacco starting under center and giving you absolutely nothing offensively, and they would have been better off just putting these guys out there sooner. I understand that there's a lot of prevailing thoughts on whether or not that's the smartest move, whether or not you should do that. I said it, to me, it made sense, but the Browns weren't willing to accept that that's who they were at this juncture, and so they did what they did. They made this bed, they got to lay in it, and now they sort of are pivoting to, let's see what the young guys are all about, right? Because Gabriel's your starter and Shedeur right now, and at least on the unofficial depth chart, is the backup. But that might not even be the case come Sunday because Kevin Stefanski wouldn't talk about it. We'll get to that coming up, like I said. And really, you could even trace this back to, you could go back to training camp and say they wasted reps. They wasted valuable reps on Flacco. They wasted valuable reps on Kenny Pickett for a little bit there that they could have been using just on the 2 rookies or on different, other quarterback options or whatever the case may have been. They absolutely could have done that. And so it goes beyond even just the 4 weeks of the regular season that you could have been evaluating these guys. You could have been getting them ready sooner, getting them acclimated sooner, getting them ready to start or play sooner by simply cutting out the middleman, not pretending that this is who you guys were going to be and be a winning football team, and just accepted what your reality right now, which is that this team was always going to be preparing, getting through 2025 to get to 2026. I hate saying that because, like I said, guys are putting their bodies in the line week after week, and that's not a message that you can viably send or sell to a locker room. So I'm not expecting that the Browns would have done that, like as I said, but it certainly just feels like, this was always going to be the inevitable route that they ended up having to take. It was always going to be, you got to a point in the season where Dillon Gabriel was starting and maybe Sanders is the primary backup, but then he plays at some point. And the fact that it happened so soon makes me feel like they should have probably just started the season that way from Jump Street and said, hey, here we are. This is us. Let's try to go out and win with the guys that we have here and these rookie quarterbacks and whatever else. and try to do it that way. I understand that that's not always the philosophy you guys subscribe to. I understand these are a 3rd-round pick and a 5th-round pick that we're talking about a quarterback. Granted, I think Shedeur was obviously underdrafted. I think he is more talented than a 5th-round pick without question. And I think there's places where you could have just started the season this way and tried to sell it differently, but they talked themselves into doing it the way that they did, and now here they are. But it just feels like if this had happened after week 6, I think it'd be a different conversation. But the fact that it happened so quickly, and not only did you already make a change at quarterback and go to Dillon Gabriel, but you also now traded Joe Flacco, who you chose to start the season with. He was the guy that was going to give you the best chance to win, and you already traded him 4 weeks in. The fact that it happened so quickly makes me feel like they should have just accepted who they were sooner and just, gone out there, as true as they were, and just tried to win football games with what they had. I get it's a tough sell, but I think that would have been probably the smarter path, just to get these guys more valuable experience, just to get these guys more valuable reps at training camp leading up to the season. All those things I think are fair and reasonable things to say. So I do think, in the grand scheme of things, that the Browns, spent 4 weeks lying to themselves about who they were and what they were sort of going to accomplish. We all knew, I think on the outside, I think most people sort of understood that this is the reality of who they were. They're a team that needs to rebuild, needed to inject a lot of youth into the roster. They did that this offseason, and Andrew Berry right now can tout the fact that he has a great rookie class right now that's dominating the league. Everyone's talking about it, how great this class is. Probably have the best rookie class in the entire NFL. Like, there's a lot to like. There's a lot to be excited about for the future. But the Browns weren't really willing to accept that fate just yet, and they delayed the inevitable here. And I just wonder if they could have gotten more valuable reps for these guys at a sooner time if they had just started the season that way. I get it's a philosophical thing. I get Kevin Stefanski, and he talked about it in that answer I played for you last segment. You'll hear more about that as well. He's prioritized the development of these guys. He's not going to rush anything. He wants to do right by them and get them prepared the correct way. All that, fine, I get it. But in the grand scheme of things, he still could have done that. He still could have prepared them while understanding. He still could have prepared them for all that and prioritize their development while just starting the season with, even if it's just Dillon Gabriel right out of one of them at the beginning of the year and then going to the other one later. You can still do that, especially if there's an understanding of who you are as a team and what you're trying to accomplish that year, and that it is about an evaluation process. But clearly, they weren't willing to accept that or admit that right now because of the makeup of this roster. And you could go down a rabbit hole here and just say, like, this is why they should have traded Myles Garrett. This is why they should have accepted this way earlier than just training camp and the regular season and all that. But I think it all just goes back to the common theme of, this is who we knew the Browns are going to be. This is the point we knew we'd reach in the season, where it was all about the rookies, all about the rookie quarterbacks. And the fact that it only took 4 weeks to get here tells me they probably should have just started the season that way to begin with. Speaking of the quarterback number 2 spot, the unofficial depth chart says it's Shedeur Sanders, but Kevin Stefanski doesn't exactly have an answer as to who it is just yet, or have a decision made, which I think is telling in of itself. We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast.
I'm Cody Rourke from Locked On Broncos, and this episode is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. This is Peloton's most advanced equipment yet, giving you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or you're cross-training with your favorite instructors like Alex Toussaint. It's training reimagined to make your workout more personal. Peloton is built for breakthroughs. With features that help you plan, stay motivated, and hit peak performance, you can let yourself run, lift, flex, and go, while Peloton handles all the rest. Plus, Peloton IQ provides real-time strength coaching, tracking your progress and suggesting weights that challenge you so you can get stronger. Plus, the new movement tracking camera, it counts your reps and corrects your form in real time, making sure every rep is safer and smarter. So let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
All right, so listen, I think Shedeur Sanders is going to be the backup quarterback this week. I think Shedeur Sanders should be the backup quarterback this week. But Kevin Stefanski was very, very non-committal, and I think that is telling. in the grand scheme of things. I mean, honestly, as I say this, maybe I don't think he's going to be the backup quarterback on Sunday because of how non-committal he was to Shedeur being the number 2 quarterback. I think what I meant to say there was I think he should be, but because Kevin Stefanski was so sort of wishy-washy playing politician on his answer to questions about who the number 2 quarterback was going to be and wouldn't commit to anything one way or another, I think that tells me he probably won't be the number 2 quarterback on Sunday, which I know is going to upset some people, but I think it's the truth. I played you the clip earlier where he was talking about doing what's best for the team. That was kind of part of the answer about who's going to be the number 2 quarterback and how he's focused. I think, honestly, that part of the answer, too, is telling. Him saying, I have to think about every player's development. I have to think about every player. I have to think about the team. That sounds to me like he's convinced. He's telling you, listen, I just don't know that Shedeur's ready, and so I have to think about his progress, his development, where he's at before I put him out on the field or make it so that he's one play away from going out on the field. So I think that was telling in its own right, but here was a couple other questions he got asked and answers that he gave in regards to the number 2 quarterback spot.
So this week, do you plan to split some like those kind of, last reps between Shedeur and Bailey and then make his decision based on how they handle everything during this
Need to work through it all, Daniel. Again, really like the guys we have. We just got to work through all of them.
On the active roster for Sunday, so you can have one as the emergency guy?
We'll see. I'm not sure yet.
Is that as simple as if you do add 3, is it just Bailey, or would you guys potentially look at outside options?
Yeah, again, I would just say it's early in the week, early in the process.
So that was him getting asked about promoting Bailey Zappi. I actually asked the question about like would they look at outside options, and he continues to just kind of reiterate the same things there. It's too early in the week, too early in the process. But again, him being so non-committal. I mean, last week he talked about in that first clip I played in the first segment how it was a very difficult decision whether or not he even wanted to start Dillon Gabriel, and he toiled over that and he thought about it and all these different things. But he still made the decision. He still was willing and ready on Wednesday to say, hey, here's what we're doing. And I get that it's different circumstances because the Joe Flacco trade was clearly a shock to him. But at this juncture, him not being willing to say, hey, it's Shedeur, who's our backup, tells me that they don't necessarily, or he doesn't necessarily think that he's ready to fill that role right now. The comments about his development and caring about guys' development and making that a priority, I think, are telling. This screams to me like they're probably going to promote Bailey Zappi from the practice squad to the active roster, and then he'll be quarterback 2 on Sunday, and then Shedeur will remain the quarterback, emergency third-string quarterback. Again, I know that's not what people want to hear. I don't agree with it. If you're doing this at this stage, if Joe Flacco's gone, you might as well prioritize these 2 rookies and give it a shot. Why not? Like, see what they got. Put them out there. Make them the 2 guys that you're sort of focused on. But it does sound to me like because this is one of those situations where it's less about what Kevin Stefanski didn't, or it's less about what Kevin Stefanski did say and more about what he didn't say. And he tiptoed around the questions. He was saying he's going to think about it, but him thinking about it, him having to think about it, him not having a straight answer tells you, I think, all you need to know about where they are with Shedeur at this point and how they feel about him stepping into that number 2 quarterback role. So I'm not anticipating that's going to be the case, but maybe this week changes his mind. I think he should be, again, for what it's worth, I think he should be the number 2 quarterback. If you're leaning into the youth movement, why not? But it doesn't sound like Kevin Stefanski's ready to make that decision. The only thing I think I can say for certain is it will not be Deshaun Watson. Once again, Kevin was asked about Deshaun and his progress in the rehab from the Achilles injury and all that. He shot it down as quick as he could again, just highlighting how great he's been doing with his rehab. He was even asked point blank period. I probably should have played that clip for you too, but it was only like 10 seconds. He was asked point blank period, do you anticipate Deshaun will return at some point and play? And he shot that down pretty quickly too and just said, I'm only focused on this week, which again tells me I think that for them, Deshaun is here. They're saying all the right things about him helping the young quarterbacks and being around and working hard and going through his rehab and all that. And he's posting on Instagram about how ready he is. But to me, the way they tiptoe around the Deshaun topic, or at least that Kevin does, makes me believe that they are trying to just draw this thing out and not have to activate him to practice and avoid that altogether. That's what it feels like to me. That's what it sounds like he's kind of indicating there. He does not want to talk about it. And so I think in a lot of ways, Deshaun is kind of out of sight, out of mind in terms of, where in terms of their quarterback plans, at least for this year, but probably beyond as well. And the people who are out here saying, I don't think he ever plays a snap again, you could be right about that. That could be what they're sort of trying to do here, is just draw this thing out until they can finally find their path to divorce. But that's the only thing I can say for certain, is that it won't be Deshaun Watson. He's not getting activated this week. But Bailey Zappi being promoted from the practice squad, or elevated from the practice squad to the active rosters, and signing there, being the third quarterback on the roster and being the number 2 quarterback, very much in play. And at this juncture, based on how Kevin avoided answering the question today, I think that ultimately ends up being what is likely the depth chart for this team come Sunday. We'll see if that's exactly how it plays out. But my guess is that's what it's going to be. And again, I disagree, because you're signaling to everybody that this is all about the rookies from here, and it's time to learn who you are moving forward. If that's the case, I just think you should put Shedeur as the number 2 guy and know, like, he'll get out there at some point and play. That seems like the natural thing to do. But it sounds like Kevin Stefanski, in a lot of ways, as he talks about protecting, or rather his players' development and thinking about his players, is trying to protect Shedeur in a way. Like, if they really don't feel he's ready, then they're trying to sort of keep him from having to be one play away, I guess. I don't know. It's an interesting situation. We'll see how it plays out through the week, but that's my read on the situation right now. And I know it's not the answer anybody wants. It's not the answer I want, because I think Shedeur's great, and I want to see him play at this level, and I want him to I want to be able to say, I think we are one step closer to seeing him on the field. But right now, whatever decision Kevin makes at the number 2 quarterback is going to be telling as to how they feel about him and where he's at right now as a whole. Another episode down with you, Dog Pound. Thanks for joining me as always to talk about your favorite football team. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button. Make Locked On Browns your first listen every day, wherever you get your podcasts, and at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can also get that double dose of the Locked On NFL podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find it at the Locked On NFL YouTube channel. I always like to remind you as well, keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs. Season's just around the corner. Locked On Guardians. Season just ended, but lots of questions to answer wherever you get your podcasts as well. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again tomorrow with our crossover edition of Locked On Browns and Locked On Steelers. See you, Cleveland.